All right, so we're at CudaCo today. We're going to do a how to shuck an oyster video. First things first, I'm going to show you some of the oyster knives that we use here in the shop. I just call this a straight blade. Nice thin tip, good for petite oysters, getting into them. This one's got a curved tip. This is like your Old Faithful that you see used a lot in a lot of places. You got the patty shucker here. Definitely a unique one, a little bit different. I think this is really like for people who are really like into this style and have used it and like feel comfortable with it. And then you have my favorite, which is the Middleton made beer shucker. Local blacksmith here does phenomenal knife work and just, yeah, gorgeous. A burl from a beautiful piece of wood in the handle and ready to pop those beers while you eat those oysters. So outside of that, since we got oyster knives, they can create damage. You need to have some safety. A glove like this works great, or a double layered up kitchen towel also works phenomenally. For the video's sake, the glove works better so that you can see what's happening a little bit. Let's talk about oysters now. Here at CudaCo, we got some beautiful oysters. We have a pretty large selection of premium oysters for all your needs at home or shucked up in here at the shop. This one's really cool. This is a Barrier Island Sea Cloud. This is a local South Carolina Charleston oyster company. This is like definitely a petite oyster. I would say this is about 2 inches. Beautiful flavor though. They just care so much and put so much energy into their product. And that's actually really cool because it's close to preserve here, Botany Preserve, near Edisto Island. And then second, we got one of our signatures, which is the Carolina Sweet. Sweet's a classification of oysters that we've worked on developing that sort of sits in between the size of a petite and a select. So you can see probably about a 1/2 inch difference. And then next we got the Johns River Sweets, another signature oyster here that we have. This one run a little bit larger, but just a gorgeous oyster. Those are from the cold waters of Maine, which creates a really beautiful flavor profile. And then right now we have my favorite oyster in the shop, which is the Jumbo John, also from Maine, also at Johns River. But instead of the sweet size, it's usually like 4 to 4.5 inches. You can see it's almost the entire palm of my hand, like softball size. That oyster tastes like the entire ocean in one bite or two, depending on who you are. Definitely that oyster's for the oyster enthusiasts. Yeah, let's get shucking. All right, we're gonna start with the Barrier Island Sea Cloud. I'm gonna use the straight tip with a little bit smaller tip on it, the straight oyster knife, because I think it's a little bit more delicate on it. And in order to understand a couple things about an oyster before you go ham and really get in there and start shucking, is that you have the cup of the oyster, which is cupped. You have the lid of the oyster, which is a flat top, and then you've got the abductor muscle right here on the right side. If you have the hinge facing you, cup side down, abductor muscle is always going to be on your right side. That really helps in shucking because once you know where the abductor muscle is, you're going to be able to free it and do a lot less damage to the oyster, or like we call it, scrambled. You're not going to scramble your oyster. So a lot of people get into oysters and they start prying like this, and that ends up breaking the hinge a lot. What you really want to do is get that tip in there, set the oyster in the palm of your hand, and you can use your pinky finger to sort of hold on to the knife so that you don't like slip in and break the belly. But I'm going to do it open so you can really see what I'm doing. And I'm just going back, rocking back and forth instead of up and down with some pressure. And you'll start to see a little bit of the liquor, which is the juice inside the oyster, seep. And that's how you know that you're in there. You can see I slipped in a little bit, which is fine because I'm going to show you what to do when that happens. So now once you get the hinge free, go ahead and wipe the debris off your oyster knife so you don't draw it into the oyster. but in the case where you slip in, you drew it into the oyster. Run the oyster knife along the lid of the oyster, just to the left, and then you're just going to come across to free that abductor muscle. Then, once it's free, the lid will just come right off. Now, what we're going to do is you can see a couple things. You can see some debris in there, and people get a little worried about that. They think it's mud or something. It's actually just algae, and it's got a lot of nutrients in it. It also adds flavor to the oyster. So if it bothers you in terms of presentation, you can just easily bring it out of the oyster a little bit, but I recommend leaving it in. Turn the abductor muscle towards you and the hinge to the left. If you're left-handed, do the exact opposite. Take your oyster knife right by the curved tip and go perpendicular to the cup shell and scrape that abductor muscle. You can see that abductor muscle sort of is a lighter color with a little bit of white part on the top. It's really similar to a scallop, and that's what you're freeing off the shell. You can also see on the shell there's this little black area, and that's where the abductor muscle is attached. So underneath the abductor muscle, you can also see that, and I'll show you there. And that's how you know once you've got shown all of that area to back to white shell, is that you got it free. Now, in this case, you can see where we hit the belly a little bit, not too bad. But in that case, for presentation, what we like to do in the industry is flip the oyster. When you flip the oyster, it just gives you that beautiful presentation, and it's ready to eat. So we're going to go ahead and set that in here and move on to the next oyster. The next oyster is going to be our Carolina Sweet from North Carolina, and we're going to use the curved tip. And same thing, hinge, start in the hinge, rock back and forth until you can sort of see a little bit of the liqueur leak out, which I can see now. That means I'm in there enough that I can use a little bit more force to pop the lid. So you could hear a nice pop. I didn't sink into the belly. I wiped the knife to get the debris off. This time with this knife, I like to go in from the hinge side on the right side. And same thing, keep the knife on the lid of the oyster and go about halfway in the oyster or all the way towards the front. And then your abductor muscle is going to be right there on the right-hand side. Draw the oyster knife across, flip the lid off. Beautiful oyster, ready to go. All right, same thing. You can see this one actually had a little bit of pluff mud in there. Once again, it's perfectly fine. Most of it's filter feeding. You can easily just sort of use your knife to wipe that and then wipe it out using your finger. This one has beautiful colored gills on it. We have no belly puncture. I'm going to look behind the belly right here to make sure there's no shell debris so we don't get crunchy bits. And then oyster knife perpendicular to the shell, and you're just going to free it from the bottom. Now, when you do that, the way to tell if an oyster is ready to be consumed is make it do the truffle shuffle. And if it's got a good jiggle, it's going to slip right down. All right, beautiful Carolina Sweet, ready to go. Put that down. Our next oyster is the Johns River Sweet. Now the Johns River Sweet, I'm going to use the Middleton Made Beer Shucker, my favorite oyster knife. And what I'm going to do is go ahead, same process, start underneath the hinge, get it in there, wiggle it back and forth until I see a little bit of moisture starting to form around that area. The shell can be brittle if it is. Just be careful, it's in there. They call this a lollipop. That's how you know you got a good hold on the hinge and you're ready to use a little bit more force to pop. So there we go, freed up nice, wipe the debris off. This oyster knife, since it's a short tip, I'm gonna go into the right of the oyster hinge, and then I'm gonna go about to the middle of the oyster, and I'm gonna draw the oyster knife forward to cut that abductor muscle on the right-hand side. So we go ahead and do that, clean cut, wipe off any debris again. Now I like to sort of lay the oyster out, make it presentable. You can see a little shell debris around the lip. We're gonna go ahead and wipe that clean, and then check the back of the oyster to make sure there's no shell. There's a little tiny piece. It looks really good. Now we can go ahead and free the abductor muscle. Now the abductor muscle's free, do the jiggle. It's still holding a little bit right here, a little bit of suction. So I'm going to go ahead and go around, and now it's really got a good jiggle. Ready to enjoy. If you break the belly, don't forget, you can always flip it. Last but not least, we have the patty shucker. The guy who created this knife, I don't know if he's still holding the world record for fastest shucker, but he did. So pretty good knife. Once you're comfortable with it, you like it. A lot of people don't start with these knives, but I like to use it on the larger oysters, especially the more difficult ones where the hinge is a lot tighter. And that's definitely the case with the Jumbo John. Once again, we're going to go ahead, go into the hinge, back and forth. This one's nice and small, so it can really get deep in there into the hinge. And then once you really feel it in there, which I do now, you can go ahead and apply a little bit more pressure, pop it, wipe that debris off that oyster knife, and then go in. I like to go in from the right with this knife. You can see it's sort of got this hook where you can cut free the abductor. We're going to go ahead, get it in there. We're going to follow the lid of the oyster so we don't stab it, and then come across. And then once we do that, you can just flip that forward. These guys are big, so you want to really do a good check on them. You can see some shell debris there on the lip, a little there, and then the belly had a little debris. Check behind, we're looking good. Turn the hinge to your left, abductor facing you, and then use this part of the knife to free the abductor. And you're looking for that dark spot. Once you're all the way through, you know it's free, which are good. A little more debris there. Now, with these bigger ones, they usually suction to the oyster cup a lot more. So just go around them, free them, sort of lay out the gill so it looks really good, and then do the jiggle. You can flip it too for presentation. I personally just like it to lay in the oyster how it is because it naturally sits in there better. But you can see beautiful presentation, so if you did have any damage, you still have something that's going to present well and really please your guest. There we go. That's how to shuck an oyster. Now it's time to eat some oysters. So you can do lemon, you can do like a mignonette, like we have here at the shop, or cocktail sauce, or my favorite, which is a nice hot sauce. I love Sweet Reaper, one of my favorites. We carry it at the shop here, and it's just amazing on raw clams and any raw shellfish. Yeah, I recommend though trying an oyster plain to really taste the subtle nuances and differences between each, and then go from there and do whatever you like. So there's no wrong or right way. You got to choose your entry point. I look for almost like an area where it can slide out of the oyster shell easily, and I always do at least 3 chews so that you can really get the full flavor. Especially by doing that, you're going to get the sweetness of the abductor in the end, which is going to give you like a beautiful scallop flavor profile. So, tastes like the entire ocean. Enjoy.